Some albums carry more than just music, and simply exist as reflections of the moments they were created in. Many of the most emotionally heavy records in rock were written during periods of addiction, emotional collapse, isolation, and mental instability, and that history is impossible to separate from the music itself. In this video, we are looking at 6 albums that feel heavy not because of their sound alone, but because of the circumstances behind them. These records were created while artists were losing control of their health, their relationships, or the sense of themselves. And instead of these artists hiding from their reality, they documented it into what we listen to. These are not albums designed to shock or disturb, they're reflective records of people slowly unraveling, preserved into music. Let's talk about these albums that no one really prepares you for. Deathconsciousness by Have a Nice Life is a post-punk record shaped by shoegaze and new wave influences. It was recorded for less than $1,000, and that limited, rough production gives the album much of its emotional weight. Dan Barrett and Tim McCouga created this double album over 5 years, mostly while Barrett was studying abroad. They collaborated through email, building something that one reviewer described as making funeral doom records sound like children's music. But unfortunately, the making of the album was much more difficult. During the recording process, Barrett's father died. Dan used the life insurance money to travel across Europe, where he drafted his 70-page booklet that accompanies the album. This booklet tells a fictional story of the Antiochian cult, a medieval religious group that worshipped the concept of death itself. The original master recordings were lost in a hard drive crash. All that remains are compressed MP3 files. The setback is pretty fitting, an album about decay that itself decayed. The production is deliberately crude, with Barrett recording vocals through his laptop's built-in microphone. His vocals are quiet, fragile, and often swallowed by the mix. Rather than sounding like someone trying to be heard, he sounds like he's talking to himself. On songs like Blood Hail and Hunter, the guitars swell until they feel overwhelming, then suddenly fall back into emptiness. The album constantly moves between noise and stillness, which mirrors the emotional push and pull of the lyrics. In interviews, Barrett said the album is directly tied into what was happening in his life. It's the opposite of predominant cultural attitude towards death in the West, namely that we should pretend it doesn't exist. It does exist, and for a long time it was all I could talk or think about. Many of the tracks stretch past normal song structures. They repeat phrases or collapse, or fade out instead of ending. This makes the album feel less like a collection of songs, and more like one long emotional state. The album cover features a darkened crop of Jacques Louis David's painting The Death of a Merit, a French revolutionary leader murdered in his bathtub. It's the perfect image for an album that feels like a musical suicide. Critics have called it a massive black hole, and the opposite of an antidepressant. It initially received almost no attention when it was released, but it spread through the internet forums, like 4chan's music board, and soon became a cult phenomenon. And since its release in 2008, it spread quietly through listeners who did not just hear it, but carried it with them. If the last album is about philosophical death consciousness, Dirt is about the physical reality of addiction destroying your body and mind. Alice in Chains recorded their second album during the 1992 Los Angeles riots. The band watched the city burn around them while capturing vocalist Layne Staley's descent into heroin addiction. Producer Dave Jordan worked at 101 Studios in North Hollywood while violence erupted in the streets. Guitarist Jerry Cantrell later recalled navigating through the riots just to get basic supplies, and watching in person people being pulled from their cars and beaten in the streets. While the city outside was collapsing in public, the band documented a different kind of collapse inside the studio. Layne Staley had just checked out of rehab in Portland and immediately relapsed. Drummer Sean Kinney later revealed that Staley was extremely high on heroin and marijuana during the recordings of key tracks like Down in a Hole and Angry Chair. The band would smoke weed in the studio, and Staley would openly inject heroin in front of everyone. Producer Dave Jordan repeatedly urged Staley to get sober. Staley apparently held a grudge about this for years, but Jordan's response was blunt. "What's my job as a producer? To produce a record. I'm not getting paid to be Layne's friend." The album's second half contains what Cantrell called a mini-suite about heroin addiction. 5 songs tracking the progression from recreational use to complete destruction. Junkhead explores what it means to be an addict. Godsmack and Angry Chair takes you deeper into that hole. Critics called it a primal sickening howl from the depths of Layne Staley's heroin addiction, and they weren't exaggerating. The album debuted at number 6 on the Billboard 200 and eventually sold over 5 million copies worldwide. But unfortunately, the touring during this time was a struggle. Staley performed with a broken foot in a wheelchair during their times opening for Ozzy Osbourne. The band also had to cancel many shows where Staley was too ill to perform. Bassist Mike Starr was fired during the tour due to his own addiction issues. The official story at the time was that there was a difference in priorities around touring, but years later, Starr himself said his escalating drug problems were a major factor. During the tour, Layne Staley saved bassist Mike Starr's life after Starr collapsed from a heroin overdose. The moment shook him, even as his own addiction worsened. Layne was still trying to keep others alive. Layne's longtime girlfriend, Demi Parrott, died in 1996 from complications related to heroin use. Layne later blamed himself for introducing her to the drug, a guilt that reportedly deepened his isolation and addiction. Layne Staley died in 2002 from a speedball overdose. His body was not discovered for nearly 2 weeks. He was 34 years old. Dirt remains the band's best-selling album and one of the most direct portrayals of addiction in rock history. On the other hand, some albums are disturbing because of their subject matter. The Madcap Laughs is disturbing because it documents a brilliant mind coming apart in real time. Syd Barrett was a founder of Pink Floyd and the primary songwriter on their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. As the band's popularity grew, Barrett's heavy LSD use and what his family later confirmed was schizophrenia caused his behavior to become increasingly unstable. He would freeze on stage, detune his guitar mid-song, or stop playing entirely. In April 1968, he was removed from the band he created, with his last song being Jug Band Blues. The song is Syd Barrett openly realizing he no longer belongs in the band he created. The lyrics describe isolation, confusion, and watching life continue without him, making it a quiet, self-aware farewell that documents his removal from Pink Floyd in real time. The Madcap Laughs was recorded over several years with multiple producers, including his former bandmates David Gilmour and Roger Waters. The sessions were erratic. Barrett would vanish for hours, lock himself in rooms, or be found unconscious. During one interview, he insisted the door be locked because he believed his managers were aliens trying to capture him. The album leaves in false starts, missed notes, and studio chatter. Gilmour later said that they may have been trying to show who Syd really was. Songs like Dark Globe sound fragile and exposed, with Barrett struggling to reach notes while openly questioning his own worth and existence. Barrett attempted a solo performance in June 1970, backed by Dave Gilmour and drummer Jerry Shirley. He lasted 4 songs before walking off stage mid-performance. Barrett never performed publicly again. He retreated to his mother's house in Cambridge, where he lived in isolation for over 3 decades, mostly painting and gardening. When his former Pink Floyd bandmates showed up in 1975 to record Shinin' You Crazy Diamond, he walked into the studio unannounced. He had shaved his head and eyebrows, and he had gained a significant amount of weight. His bandmates didn't recognize him at first. He reportedly looked blank and distant, and after listening in silence for a while, he softly said, "It sounds a bit old." His former bandmates were stunned and visibly shaken, with the moment hitting them hard once they realized how far removed he was from both music and the person they remembered. Syd Barrett would eventually pass away in 2006. The Madcap Laughs remains a beautiful, yet tragic document of artistic genius consumed by mental illness. Closer was released in July 1980. Lead singer Ian Curtis died 2 months earlier. He never heard the finished album. Joy Division recorded Closer in March 1980 at Britannia Row Studios in London. By that point, Curtis's epilepsy had become severe, with frequent grand mal seizures that worsened by the exhaustion from touring. During the sessions, bassist Peter Hook once found Ian Curtis unconscious in a studio bathroom after a seizure. The band had little understanding of how to help him. Curtis's medications caused intense mood swings and deep depression. His wife Deborah later wrote that he became withdrawn and distant, and he was afraid to even hold his own infant daughter because of the risk posed by his condition. At the same time, Curtis was involved in a relationship with Belgian artist Annick Honoré, which left him emotionally torn as his marriage collapsed. As Joy Division prepared for their first American tour, Curtis grew increasingly overwhelmed. On stage, his seizures were sometimes mistaken for part of the performance, turning his loss of physical control into something audiences mythologized. Curtis later acknowledged that he would occasionally incorporate seizure-like movements deliberately, but the distinction was often impossible to make. What audiences saw as intensity or choreography was at times his body genuinely failing him. In April 1980, Curtis survived a suicide attempt. Shortly after, he told his bandmate Bernard Sumner that with Closer, the band had reached an artistic peak, and there was nowhere left to go. On May 17, 1980, the day before Joy Division was supposed to leave for America, Curtis's wife Deborah left him alone at their house to go work at the local disco. Before she left, Curtis asked her to drop the divorce proceedings. She told him he'd probably change his mind by the morning. That night, Curtis drank coffee and spirits. He watched the film Shawshank, which was about a musician who moves to America and kills himself. He played Iggy Pop's The Idiot on repeat. One of the lyrics goes, "Well, the day begins, you don't want to live, because you can't believe in the one you're with." In the early hours of May 18th, 1980, Ian Curtis hanged himself in his kitchen. He was 23 years old. The album is called Closer because Curtis was getting closer to the end. Songs like 24 Hours and The Eternal read like suicide notes in retrospect. The lyrics were all there, but nobody was really listening until it was too late. After his death, Bernard Sumner said it was the only time the band truly understood Curtis's lyrics. The album titled Closer feels painfully literal, not as a concept, but as a reality no one fully recognized at the time. By 1982, The Cure were physically and emotionally exhausted after years of relentless touring. Robert Smith was dealing with depression, personal loss, and a growing sense of isolation. The band recorded the album Pornography at RAK Studios in London under extreme conditions. Heavy substance use, lack of sleep, and constant tension defined their sessions. Smith later described the period as one where everything felt unstable, including his relationships with the band. Conflict became constant, especially between Smith and bassist Simon Gallup. Smith later admitted that his behavior pushed nearly everyone in his life away. He described the album as an attempt to release everything he was feeling, rather than collapse under it. The album opens with 100 Years, and immediately establishes its bleak tone. Songs like The Hanging Garden, Cold, and the title track feel claustrophobic and oppressive, reflecting Smith's mental state at the time. The tour that followed was disastrous. Fights between band members escalated, including physical altercations, which led to Gallup eventually leaving the band. At this point, Robert Smith considered ending The Cure entirely, but despite this, Pornography became the band's most successful album up to that point. While critics were divided initially, it is now regarded as one of the most defining gothic rock albums ever made. Smith has since said he believes it's one of The Cure's best records, but also one that could not be made again without serious consequences. These albums are more than music. They were shaped by grief, addiction, mental illness, and emotional collapse. Dan Barrett turned loss into Deathconsciousness. Layne Staley documented addiction on dirt. Syd Barrett's unraveling is preserved into the Madcap Laughs. Ian Curtis left his inner life etched into Closer, and Robert Smith pushed himself to the brink, making Pornography. Some of these artists survived, others did not, but each of these records exists because the artists were confronting something they couldn't escape. Thank you for watching, and before the video ends, I wanted to say that only 0.1 of my viewers are subscribed, so consider subscribing or clicking on one of the videos up on the screen now.